Good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, whether you're live or whether you are going to watch this recording afterwards. Tonight, I have Katie Gerber with me again, and tonight we're going to be talking about how to plan a backpacking trip, specifically in the Brooks Range, but we think that a lot of the content is going to be broadly applicable to Alaska in general. So the presentation is going to run for 45 minutes. If you'd like to ask questions, you can use the right side of your screen, and Katie is going to be doing the bulk of moderating in tonight, so she'll be fielding those from the audience. And one announcement before we get started. We have one spot available on a 7-day guided technical canyoneering trip in southern Utah, starting on April 29th. If anyone is interested, please shoot me an email after the presentation. We can talk. Right now, it's being offered to the public at a 50% discount because we think well-wasted spots are just kind of wasted opportunities. So, okay, so Katie, you want to jump into things?
Yeah, let's dive in. I thought it would be helpful to start sort of high level with touching on the unique appeal as well as some of the challenges that are unique to Alaska and maybe specifically the Brooks Range. Why does it carry, I think it has this mystique, but it's also very intimidating for people to think about planning trips there, which is a lot of times why people come on a guided trip. So Andrew, what do you think is what makes it so appealing for people?
Yeah, it's funny when we were kind of coming up with this, I guess in my mind, everyone's like, wow, Alaska, it sort of almost speaks for itself, and especially the Brooks Range. What is it specifically about these areas? And I think for me, the big appeal I'm reading the chat comments. Andrew did get a new office. Andrew has a significantly upgraded office, and Luxor also has a spot right here. This is his daily throne. It's one of our new countertop chairs with a poof on it. And he basically spends his entire day there.
Wouldn't be a live stream without mentioning Luxor.
Of course not. Should we talk about Esme too? Esmeralda is in the guest room, her new cat suite, and probably specifically in a box with a 20-degree Sierra Design sleeping bag with a broken zipper in it. So there's enough about the cats. Okay, back to the Brooks Range. So I think for Alaska, the thing about Alaska is the land is, I would say it's de facto wilderness. So it's unlike in the lower 48, where we have it's mostly civilized, and then there are pockets of wilderness. In Alaska, that those portions get inverted. So it's mostly wilderness with a few pockets of civilization. And most of Alaska is just unchecked wilderness, the way it has always been. The rivers flow as they want to. Most of the forests have never been clear cut, especially at least outside of that southeastern Alaska section. The land has never been farmed, so there's very little impact of man, and this is a state that is still largely in its natural state. And then another big appeal is you have all the apex predators and just these very fully functioning ecosystems, which is not really the case down here.
No. Yeah, we were talking offline a minute just before we jumped on here about what is that wow factor, because we were saying Andrew first went to the Brooks Range 15 years ago and I first went I think it was 3 years ago, and when I got there it's stunning. It kind of takes your breath away, and I was trying to think of what that was, and it's that vastness, the vast wilderness. And I remember being on that bush flight for the first time and just seeing the mountain ranges go and go and go as we were going from Fairbanks up to the Brooks Range, and I was just this place is incredible. I haven't experienced anything like this. So that was the appeal to me, and I think that speaks to a lot of people. So that's the appeal. What are some of the challenges? Because as I mentioned, planning a trip to Alaska is very intimidating for a lot of people.
Yeah. So one of the big challenges, and I'm not sure who Pizza Rune is, but he says, I think one of the oddest things about the Brooks Range is there's almost zero context for it. It's kind of alien, and that is spot on, because one of the big challenges for going up to Alaska on any kind of trip, and the Brooks Range would be included in that, is just most Americans from the lower 48 are unfamiliar with this landscape. They just have no firsthand experience with it, not even on a casual basis. Maybe you've gone up there for a cruise, or maybe you were sightseeing in Anchorage or something, or maybe you did some day hiking in the Kenai Peninsula, but that's going into the wilderness is a totally different thing. So it is kind of like a mystery. think that's one of the big challenges of Alaska. And it doesn't help that there are very few online resources. We'll bring up a we'll bring up the All Trails page for Gates of the Arctic National Park later. But there's one trail on All Trails for Gates of the Arctic National Park, and I think Gates of the Arctic National Park is something like 7 times bigger than Yellowstone. So very few online resources. There's no dedicated guidebook for like exactly how to hike in the Brooks Range, like where to go, how to get there, routes you can potentially do. So most of the information about the Brooks Range is kind of old-timey, like Alaska. It's personal networking, word of mouth, kind of need to know someone who knows. And I would think either the locals all seem okay with that, and I'm not sure if it's just because they're all pretty well connected or because they're okay with just things being quiet.
Keeping their secret. Yeah.
So the other two big challenges when I think of Alaska, one is just this, as Katie referenced, this is vast wilderness. There's very little in the way of like man-made infrastructure. There are very few roads, and help is just really far away. So it's this, it's both intimidating and also it's like this paralysis of options too, where you look at a map of Gates of the Arctic National Park, the place is huge, and you're like, well, where do I go? Like where? Because there's so many options, and like even just in Alaska, do you want to go to the Brooks Range? Do you want to go to the Alaska Range? If you want to go to the Alaska Range, do you want to go to Denali? Do you want to go to the Eastern Alaska Range? If you want to go down to the Wrangells, do you want to go like in from the south side? Do you want to go from the north side? It's just endless options. So, and then finally, the last big challenge of being in Alaska is just that the terrain is hard. There's a lot of really slow travel, so thick bushwhacking, tedious tussocks, like extensive swamps and muskeg that are really wet and swampy. There are also a lot of natural barriers, so like impassable mountain ranges, huge glaciers, big rivers, and then you have a lot of also like pretty bad weather. So
yes.
So those are the challenges of being up there, and that's I would point out we get a lot of applicants for our guided trips that have never been on another trip with us before because they're like, look, I can do the Kings Canyon High Basin route. I've done the Wind River High route. I've hiked the John Muir Trail like 4 times, including leading a couple of groups. But I'm not ready to go to the Brooks Range. It just is. It's too much. It's kind of like definitely like a big level up.
Definitely. Okay, so there's a question in the chat about arranging flights post Anchorage Fairbanks. So we'll get to logistics and trip planning a little bit later on. But first, I think it would be helpful to just do like an orientation, like where in the state is the Brooks Range? What is, the size of it? Talk about any like roads or towns, prime walking areas.
Okay, I have slides.
Great.
Okay, so this is the Brooks Range. Actually, let me zoom out a little bit more. Here's Alaska. Here is the Alaska Range, and within the Alaska Range, Denali is part. So like Denali National Park is kind of right here. This is Wrangells St. Elias National Park down here, and then the Brooks Range is up in the north. And let me give you some measurements. So from end to end, if you include like the very small Canada section, you're looking at about 700, a little over 700 miles. And depends exactly when you decide that the Brooks Range starts and finishes, but that'll give you an idea. And then it's also a really girthy mountain range. It's like 90 miles in some sections from north-south, which is, I was trying to think of like a comparison mountain range or comparable mountain range in the lower 48 that we could relate to. So the Appalachian Mountains are said to be about 1,500 miles long. So it's like half the length of the Appalachians. But I think the Appalachian Mountains themselves are they're definitely not as clearly delineated. The Appalachians have much more significant foothills that run, well off of the crest. Okay, so that's where it is and the measurements. There's only one road that cuts through the entire mountain range. That's the Dalton Highway. The Dalton Highway starts down in Fairbanks and it goes north up towards Prudhoe Bay. I only drew the section that goes through the mountains. There's only one town in the Brooks Range. It's a native village. It's in Iqtuivik Pass. There are a few villages or towns on the borders, so like Coldfoot, Bettles, Arctic Village, Amblers down here at Kobuk. But Inukjuvik Pass is the only one that's like really in the heart of the range. And then final thing to talk about is just the watersheds. And also there's a good slide to talk about the best walking. So this is the Continental Divide, and it separates, for most of the length, separates the Yukon River from any of the Arctic rivers. And then down over here, this is the Continental Divide actually comes south, but this is the watershed divide between the Ambler and the Noatak. And this is not to be overlooked because this is actually a good bit of walking. Like there's some really good terrain in here. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but one of the important things about the Brooks Range is that it's the geographic barrier between the Arctic and the interior. So, so if you are in the if you're in the interior and like on the south side of the mountains, south side of the range, you have a lot of black spruce, you have a lot of brush, and you get actually basically everything that you would find in the interior just kind of moves north and stops on the south slopes of the Brooks Range. So again, it's the black spruce, the willow, the dwarf birch, and some other things. Once you're on the north side of the mountains, once you're on the north side of the Continental Divide, it's completely Arctic. So you will not find a tree on the north side of the Brooks Range, which is wild.
It's like, very wild.
Yeah, that it's that stark of a barrier. Yeah, because it's also not a real high mountain range. A lot of the passes in the Brooks Range are going to be maybe like 3,500 feet, 4,000 feet, and that's about it.
Yep. Okay. Before we move on to what makes the Brooks Range sort of like notable within Alaska, there's a few things in the chat that I want to bring up. So Spencer says, I know the team has done a good job of preserving some DIY aspect of being outdoors, not posting exact GPX files, etc. But how do we continue to make these places more accessible without compromising the unadulterated secret and making wild places overrun? So yeah, I have thoughts on that, but I'd be curious what yours are.
Well, since I've been doing the bulk of the talking,
Well, I mean, the first thing that came to mind for me is, well, I think not posting exact GPX files and routes is important, but even more than that, I think that because there is a certain skill set required with traveling there, and you do need to know so much, like all the factors that we're talking about, it's going to end up like there will only be like a smaller subset of people who are even interested in going there because of all these factors and who are capable of trip planning and executing trips there. And I think that's part of what's going to keep them from being overrun ever.
Yeah, I think the Brooks Range and Alaska generally it's like self-culling.
Yes.
Where I mean the truth is that I feel like tonight I could share an exact route, go like, hey, we did this route last summer. It'd be appropriate if you're around about this fitness and if you have 7 days. And I could share that exact route on GPS, and you might be shocked at how few people actually jump on that opportunity, because it's like, okay, that means I need to spend $1,000 to get to Fairbanks. I need to spend $250 a night while I'm there in Fairbanks or collecting my stuff. Then I need to fly to Bettles, which is $200, and then I take a bush plane, it's going to vary depending on the plane and how many people you have in your party, but around like $750 a person or so. And then you need to get our itineraries. I won't tell you where we finish, but we fly back to Fairbanks, and that's another $200. So that's an expensive trip for a week. It's like, we tell our clients to budget, like just not even including our costs, probably about $2,000.
And not only expensive, but we were just talking about this before we started recording too, the amount of time that you need to properly plan a trip there, especially like a longer trip, is very extensive. It's just so much less like plug and play as other places.
Which is it's actually worth specifically mentioning Eric. So one of our clients, multi-time client, his name is Eric Volk. Last summer, he traversed the Brooks Range. And the first time Eric went to the Brooks Range was in 2021. He was on my trip, and he was just so captivated by the place. He went back the next summer in 2022 and did 2 one-week trips, using his starting point as a resupply. And then last summer he did a whole traverse. And Eric is extremely analytical, and he tracked all this time he spent planning for that trip, and he spent 220 hours planning the whole thing. And out of those 220 hours, 120 hours were spent on route planning. So that was either like timing Caltopo or communicating with people about routes that they'd done and giving it and like getting their feedback on what he was planning to do. That's crazy. That's so much time. Yeah.
So much time. Okay. Okay. Let's jump back into this. So, and there, I did see the question in the chat from Remy about best hikes, 7 to 10 days hikes in Alaska. I think we could come back to that later and talk more about sort of like some of the prime regions.
That's a good way to answer it. Yeah. But yeah, we can't, I don't think, I mean, there's so much, like I would need to ask, you 10 questions before I gave you good recommendations. Like, have you been to Alaska before? Like, what's your backpacking skill set?
Yeah. And
like, what's your fitness level?
Yeah. And it's different than other places. It's not like, oh, just look up the such and such trail and make a loop out of it. It's like, that doesn't exist. Okay. So yeah, let's dive into a little bit of, I think you've touched on sort of how the Brooks Range is notable by Alaska standards, unless there's anything else you want to speak to with that.
Maybe just the one thing is that, I mean, first, so even by Alaska standards, the Brooks Range is really remote. When I did my big Alaska Yukon expedition now 14 years ago, the average distance between resupply points was twice as long as any other part of the route. So it just gives you an idea about like how much more remote the Brooks Range is than even other parts of the state. So that'd be one thing. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning is that if you do manage to plan a trip to the Brooks Range and you actually land in the Brooks Range and get to go backpacking, just consider that a win. You're at the outer reaches of civilization. You're north of the Arctic Circle. You are flying. You're probably taking like 9-passenger Cessna Caravans, followed by a bush plane that was built in 1954, landing in the wilderness on a lake.
If your lake isn't frozen.
Right, if your lake isn't frozen. And if the weather was okay.
Yeah.
And if the pilot doesn't have COVID. And yeah, there's so many other things that could go wrong. So yeah, if your luggage made it to Fairbanks. So just be ecstatic if you get to the Brooks Range. That's like a win. And if you can actually go backpacking, that's like so icing.
That's right. Okay, let's talk about seasonality and get into some specifics. So how long is the backpacking season in the
3 months? It's 3 months.
Yes.
It starts in June, and it's over by it's definitely over by the middle of September at the latest. I think if you've never been to Alaska before, like it can be hard to understand like the seasons up there. But one easy way to think about it is think about what you're seeing like in the slide here, and think about the types of weather that you must have to create those conditions and where you might find similar conditions in the lower 48. So for example, like in Colorado, tree line is at 10,000-ish feet, maybe 10.5. So this whole photo is above tree line. So think about the conditions in Colorado. Like, we never plan like high priority trips after the middle of September in Colorado. It's totally hit or miss after that. So you would want to approach the Brooks Range the same way. So let me keep on running with this. So the seasonality in the Brooks Range. Here we go. So here's the month of June. The snow has largely melted off except for the highest elevations and like the most shaded areas. And it's starting to green up. The rivers will swell during the month of June. So early June is kind of a tough time of year. You can't go very far just because you just hike a little ways and there's too much water for you to get through. So we always plan our trip starting in the middle of June. It's kind of after the rivers have come down, after things have started greening up a little bit, after most of the snow has melted off. So this is the month of June. In July, the mosquitoes come out. The mosquitoes come out in July, and that's like its own season. And then there's August. And this photo here, I looked at the time date. This was taken on August 26th. So you have like full-on Arctic color or fall colors in the tundra by the end of August. So figure that like the first snows aren't that far behind, probably a couple of weeks.
What about early season hiking in the
Oh,
Brooks Range?
great question. So there's really no like it's like early season conditions in the Western U.S., especially like the Sierra, can be really fun. In fact, like I would say last summer they were my most fun trips when we were up there when there's still a lot of snow around. But there's no early season condition or there's no early season in the Brooks Range. What happens? So the snowpack, it's let's say how do I describe this? It has very little structure to it because this when the snow falls in the winter, it's so cold, so it's like extremely high um, air to, or it's how do we describe it? Um, it's like a 1 to 15 ratio, like water to liquid water to like inches of snow. So really fluffy, powdery snow. And then you have huge temperature gradients all winter long. So the snowpack becomes extremely faceted, which if you've traveled in the wintertime, you know what that means. It's a really bad thing for avalanche danger. And then in the spring, what happens is the snow just starts to melt, and and it and there's a little bit of like a freeze thaw cycle, but then it just goes isothermic and just melts steadily, and it never really sets up to give itself any kind of structure. So it's in the spring, like if you're there in June and you're hiking on snow, it is rotten, 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 and your post holing is as deep as you can go.
That rapid melting too, I imagine is related to the daylight cycles, right? Like the constant daylight that you experience in June.
Right, you get 24 hours of daylight, so there's no like cold nighttime low.
Right.
The daytime temperatures fluctuate maybe 10-ish degrees, all things being equal.
Yep. Okay. I think that's good for seasonality. So let's dive into logistics because I know that's a big factor that people are
Are there
wondering about.
some questions in the chat that we should just
Oh,
answer?
sure, we can answer them now. I would thought, well, sure, we can answer them now. So there's one on bear safety. What are your thoughts on bear safety related to group size in the Brooks Range? Thoughts on a small two-person group in the Brooks?
So I believe that until Knowles proved otherwise, the record was that there's never been a bear attack on a group of 4 or more. So 2 is less than 4, so there's a greater risk there than if your group was double that size. But certainly 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, and because you'll be talking more often, you'll have more smell, so you'll be looking around more. So I think that there's a lower risk than 2 that versus solo, but it's something that you're going to have to contend with.
Mm-hmm.
And then as far as thoughts on a small 2-person, I thought that was a 2-person tent. I thought was the next word. You do not want a small tent in the Brooks Range. Katie, why is that?
Because you may be in it for a very long time to stay away from the bugs, or to most likely because of a storm and because of rain. So yeah. We always encourage clients to like have some space, be comfortable in there. Yeah. There is a question on multi-month paddling, recommendations for multi-month paddling trips. Do you have anything on that?
I watched a very cool documentary on a guy who canoed across like northern Canada. It looked very neat.
Mm-hmm. Scott paddled the Firth last year in the Yukon.
That's right.
Yeah.
But that's like multi-month though. I mean, the Firth is a couple. The Firth is like a week or 2, probably.
True.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any book recommendations for the Brooks Range?
Yeah. So like the definitive book, or one of them at least, is, it goes by a few different names, but it's Bob Marshall's book. So you might see it as Alaskan Wilderness or the Arctic Wilderness. And Bob Marshall he would go up there mostly in the summer, but also went up there in the wintertime as well. And this was back in the 20s and 30s. And at that time, this was still like, I mean, not only was the area in its natural state, but the people were still in their natural state as well. So it's just a fascinating read of all of the different trips that he did while he was up there. And he didn't have any of the advantages that we have today. So like he literally was mapping out watersheds because the United States Geological Survey hadn't been up there yet, and he wasn't able to fly into like Bettles. I'm trying to remember how he even got to Bettles. Did he take a barge up to Bettles and then he got like a rowboat, not a rowboat, but like one of those like poling boats. I don't remember, but like I mean, his trips are long just because of how long it took to like move around up there, even just
Yeah.
getting to the area. Yeah.
There's another one, a book called Arctic Dreams
Yeah.
by Barry Lopez. That's a really good one. It was written in the 80s, and I think he was doing scientific research up in like the Brooks Range in northern Alaska, and it does a deep dive into different animals that you find up there and like the culture up there. So it's like a deep dive on polar bears and the muskox, and his writing is just, it's very poetic. It's a good read. It's long, but it's great. Of the summer months in the Brooks, could you put them in order from most rainy to least rainy?
Yeah. I was just, oh, let's see if I can do this quickly. I believe the answer is June is least and August is most. But let's it's been a while since I used this tool.
Yeah, I haven't been there in a little bit either.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to mess around with it too much, but we can try for a sec.
Real-time conditions assessment here.
Okay, yeah. So we can do Bettles. So let's take a look. So Bettles. Now Bettles is low and it's on the south side, so it's going to be different. So they're saying June monthly precip 1.4 inches, July monthly precip 2.36, and August 2.64. So definitely June overall is the drier. Actually, it's but July and August, I think, probably within like statistical margin of error. Let me see if I can grab one other location, because I think if we looked on the north side, it might be a little different. Yeah, Chandler Lake would be a good one. Let's see if we can find. Okay, so this would be more on the north side. So 1.2 inches, 1.32 inches. Yeah, so an increase during the summer, but it's also not. I don't think it changes that much. Like, and the reality is like 1.2 inches, 1.3 inches, 1.5 inches. That's not going to make or break your trip. Okay.
Okay, let's keep moving.
I'm really glad that I tried to do that on site and was able to do it.
In real time, yeah. Okay, so let's say I want to plan a trip to the Brooks Range. How do I get there? How do I even like get on site?
Okay, so here are your options. One option is to well, let me start with this. You always start in Fairbanks, at least to get to the Brooks Range. So you go to Fairbanks, and then from Fairbanks you have a couple of different options. One is to take a shuttle bus on the Dalton Highway. It's called the Dalton Express, and it will drop you off. It'll drop you off along the Dalton Highway. And if you do that, I definitely would recommend getting dropped higher up. So because if you get dropped off in Wiseman, like that is it's a lot of brush and a lot of trees. So I would say like the Chandler Shelf. I think this is the Chandler Shelf. This is probably about like kind of the minimum on the south side. And notice too, this is the northernmost spruce tree right here. So you kind of want to get a little bit further north than that. Or you could get dropped off on the north side, and that would be good too. So that's the Dalton Express. That's one option. It's probably the most economical option, but it's going to take you a while to drive, to like be driven up there. Next option is to take a right air flight. So when we talk about right air, so this is a Cessna Caravan. It flies 9 passengers, and you can take one of these guys, and they're reliable. They fly, what is it? Visual? No, it's not visual flight rules. It's the opposite. They have instruments that tell them where they are, so they're able to fly in weather that is less favorable. And from Fairbanks, you can fly into Aniktuduk Pass, and then you can start your trip. and that's actually like a really economical way to start a Brooks Range trip. I think it's worth just mentioning if we are going to recommend that people take a trip to start their trip in Inukjuvik. Katie, what do you think we should mention?
Yeah, so these are our native villages. They're very small, and I think it's important to remember that like there are people who are this they live there. This is their home, and so to have like backpackers and travelers coming through, I think I think just overall being respectful of the people that live there. It's not like an interpretive site. You know, again, this is people's home, and the living experience is it's very different there. It's usually very low income. It's very different than most of the people who are coming from the lower 48 who can even afford to be there. So I think just keeping that in mind that, again, I think it just comes back to like being respectful of where you are, whether it's Inukjuvik Pass or Arctic Village or any of them.
Okay, so that's option number 2. Option number 3 is that you can take one of those Cessna caravans. You fly from Fairbanks and you fly either into Bettles or you fly into Coldfoot or Arctic Village. And from there, you can take a bush plane. I think that's a beaver.
I think it is too, yeah.
So these bush planes, some of them are on floats. So if you fly into Bettles, you'll be using Brooks Range Aviation. They have amphibious planes. So they have this season, I think they have 2 or 3 beavers. They no longer have an otter. And these planes are old. The one I flew in last year, I unfortunately looked to my right as we were flying, and I noticed the serial number, and I remember it as being 2 years younger than my mom, who was 72. So
That's amazing.
yeah, I was like, okay, I hope the maintenance has been good. So some of them are amphibious floats, and these planes have to land on lakes, and then some of them have big tundra tires, and those can land on gravel strips. And those gravel strips are not really maintained; they're just like natural gravel bars that where the planes can land. So those are your options, and by far the bush planes are the most expensive by far. For a 5, I'm trying to remember what our costs are this year. I think for a 5-passenger beaver, let me actually tell you what it is. Hold on.
Yeah, Spencer, instrument flight rules. Put in the chat.
Katie, where's our? Do you remember the name of the file that we're using? We sketched out all of the.
I don't.
Okay, I think the cost is like, I want to say like $4,000 now. It's expensive.
It's expensive.
Yeah. I'm frustrated that I can't find this. Okay, what's the next question?
Okay, well, I think we should dive into just like route planning and navigation in general. Well, the first part of like planning, I think, would be looking into permits and regulations. So specifically in the Brooks Range, do you want to speak to what permits you might need to get, or if there are regulations around food storage or anything like that?
We can do that. I found what I was looking for. So, like Coyote Air, Yukon Air, which flies out of Fairbanks and also out of Arctic Village. They're about $5,000 for a 4-passenger plane. It's like $1,000 a person. Brooks Range Aviation is for 5 people. It was $1,400 a person for a round trip. So it's expensive. It's super expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really, really expensive. Okay, moving on.
Yes. Okay, permits and regulations.
Yeah, not much. No permits for anywhere you want to go, and Gates of the Arctic National Park says that you need a bear or food storage device that's approved by the Interagency Grizzly Bear Council, and that could include ursacs. And that's it. It's like so little red tape.
Pretty great.
Oh, Gates of the Arctic also likes if you stop at the ranger station either Fairbanks or Bettles or Aniktuvik and get a little ranger orientation. And if you haven't been up there before, I would actually recommend it. It's a good ranger talk, usually.
That's very good. I agree. There are questions in the chat. Do you want to go there or do you want to do?
Yeah, let's take them on. Yeah.
Okay. So Fred asked about updated tent guidance after the hailstorm.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the story, so one of our groups got caught by like an epic hailstorm, thunderstorm a couple years ago, and it poked holes through a lot of the DCF shelters. And so I think our recommendation continues to be, though, DCF, just the heavier version of it, so like the 0.75 ounce rather than the 0.5. And we don't fault anyone for going up there with like sil nylon or sil poly shelters, which have just a little bit more give to them.
Yes. Okay. What sort of camping fuel can you actually carry on those planes, or can you buy in the tiny village?
Great question. Yeah, so you cannot fly, Right Air will not allow you to fly canister fuel on the plane.
Yep.
So yeah, it's like prohibited because the Right Air services, they're regulated by the FAA. So canister fuel can't go on those planes. So if you fly into Bettles, usually Brooks Range Aviation, not even usually, Brooks Range Aviation gets a delivery of fuel canisters, and they will sell them to you there. I'm not sure what the story is in Coldfoot, but I would be willing to bet that there are probably fuel canisters in Coldfoot too. But you cannot buy fuel canisters in Aniktuvik Pass either. So you'll have to use alcohol stoves.
Yep. Okay. Let's get into route planning. Okay, so there's no trails, there's no guidebooks. I want to plan a trip up there. What do I do? Should I go into all trails and find a route?
We have a correction. Nathan Camps, who is a certified like pilot type guy and also an airplane enthusiast, he's telling me that this is the Otter. So this is a 9-passenger bush plane. Unfortunately, no longer in service. Crashed a couple years ago, and they can't get the parts. Okay, so we want to talk about route planning. Is that where you want to go with this?
Let's do that.
Okay, so route planning is, as I mentioned earlier, route planning is like probably the barrier to entry in planning any trip in Alaska and the Brooks Range specifically. The Brooks Range, there are no trails in the Brooks Range, and there are also no guidebooks. So there's no equivalent of like Secors, the High Sierra for the Brooks Range. There just isn't such a thing. And for this will be fun. So this is the All Trails page for Gates of the Arctic National Park. So this is an enormous park. Let me tell you how much bigger. Oh, okay. So 3.4 times bigger than Yellowstone, and All Trails has one trail. It's called Arrogich Peaks. That's a little dramatic. Yeah, it's a use trail that goes up Arrogich Creek. I can show you where it is. So Arrogich Peaks they're down in this area, down like the southwestern part of the Brooks Range, and it is a spectacular area. So you fly into an area called Circle Lake, and then you walk up. The use trail goes up. First, you stumble across like 2.5 miles of like terrible tussocks, and then you follow a use trail that's very, very muddy, and it takes you up into Arrogich Creek, and that's it. That's a dead end unless you know how to get over Ariel Peak right here and be on your way into something else that's interesting. But you can't get out of this drainage. There's only one way out of this drainage, and it's to go over a mountain right here. When you're looking at these contour lines, I will point out that all these contour lines are 100 feet, and this is a mile.
Yep. So those maps are 1 to 62,500.
Yeah.
Which is different than what we would normally be looking at.
So so no guidebooks, no recommendations on all trails. So my recommendation, if you are like for your first trip to the Brooks Range, what you want to do is you want to do something like this. Brooks Range backpacking trip report. And you want to find someone who has given enough detail that you could maybe replicate their trip. I'm not going to get into any of these because there are some, but if they're good, they're not going to give it all away. But at least it will. At least it's like, at least it's like gives you some parameters to start planning your own trip. And if you do a trip that someone else has done before, you at least know that it can be done. You know that some of the challenges that you might encounter. I would recommend that you give yourself plenty of cushion to pull off that trip because you don't really know who wrote it. In fact, there's one trip report when I did the search earlier. Where's Luke's site? Where's things to look at? Where is he? Oh, well, Climber Kyle, he's insane. So be careful. And then Luke Mel lives up there. So again, just be really careful of just thinking, oh, well, like, this guy Luke Mel did it. I can do it too. And then my recommendations, after you do like an off-the-shelf route your first time, the second trip you can do something more cool and more adventurous and more unique. But I just think for that first trip, just go with something that's established.
Yeah, because I think you need to learn like the footing and just like how to move through the terrain and how to do like map terrain association in that place specifically because it is so different. There's a question in the chat that I think is going to lead into the next topic very well. So Nano Michael says, because it's treeless in the northern part and the options are seemingly endless, as you mentioned, can one approach a 14-day trip simply with a rough general route and improvisation?
Yeah, well, I'm laughing because the answer is like, no.
Right. No, well, if you have some certain principles in mind, maybe of like what to expect.
Yeah, I guess like, yeah, you could, if you just load up with food and just start wandering around, you can, but
you're gonna have a hard time.
Yeah. So here's the deal. Here's the challenge of when you look at these maps. So these maps, there's a couple of things going on that you just need to know of. One is that they were all drawn during basically statehoods, like the 60s and 70s. They're a different scale and contour interval than we're used to working with in the lower 48. So most of the maps they're 100-foot contour lines. This is 2,500 feet, 2,600, 2,700, 2,800, 2,900, 3,000. And just so much lingers between, in 100-foot contour intervals. So that's one thing and then another thing is that the scan quality can be pretty poor in a lot of areas. Like just look at the difference. Like this is, I don't know what explains it. There's some other maps like over in the refuge that are you can't even tell what's going on in here almost. So just poor scan quality. There's inconsistent like cartography, like the way that they drew some of these maps. So like the way that they represent, say, like swamp or gravel bars or something like that. Another map scale that you'll see is, or contour interval you'll see, these are 20 meter contours. So that's a dramatic change between 20 meters, which is like 66 vertical feet or so, and 100-foot contour lines. So that's another contour interval you'll have to get used to. Thankfully, at least all the maps are a consistent scale. So it's 1 to 62,500. So it's equivalent of like those old 15-minute USGS maps. When you're looking around and trying to figure out kind of like trying to associate the terrain or associate the maps with terrain, the slope angle shading is your best friend. It just will, it's like the equalizer between maps at 100-foot contour lines, for example, over here, and maps at 20-meter contour intervals over here. The slope angle shading is just going to be more consistent. And also the slope angle shading is the same shading that we have down in the lower 48. So like if you are used to traveling in Colorado or the High Sierra, you know that purple. Katie, what does purple mean?
It's hard. Probably, yep, maybe impenetrable.
Yeah,
Probably need some climbing skills
yeah.
or like
Versus red,
cliff band.
which is
Yeah,
red is like usually red will go,
yeah.
and yellow is just steep. Yeah. So back to this question though. So it's like, okay, can I just kind of wander around up here? Because that's the other difficulty. Is like all I. Um, so one of the challenges here. Let me do this. So there are two challenges of planning routes and then route finding that we're not used to in the lower 48. One of them is this. It's a brush zone. So it's above the trees, but below the tundra, and you get all of this brush. So it's like alder, dwarf birch, and willow. Those are the big ones. And if you're looking at the map, you can't there's no indication that it's there. Like let me like I am certain that this whole valley is filled with brush, like filled with brush, and this one too. And there's no indication that it's there. So you need some prior experience to understand where the brush zone is. And then the other thing that's unique about the Brooks Range is that you have permafrost. And the permafrost, it's a permanently frozen layer of ground. And what that does is it causes a lot of water just to sit on the surface. And a lot of the vegetation reacts to that by becoming very like spongy and like yes, spongy, I think is the right word for it.
That's definitely the right word.
Yeah, and then you can also get tussocks, and I've never, as tedious as tussocks are, as much as we all sort of despise them, I've actually never gotten a photo that like really captures the difficulty of tussocks.
No.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the skills of being up in Alaska and planning a route is just that you can look out over a landscape like this, and you can tell where the good travel is and where the bad travel is, and that's just that is a matter of experience. So like someone, this is my photo, so I've been there. But even if this were not my photo, I could look at this and go, oh, like Katie, what are these flowers down here?
Those are avens.
Those are avens, and what do avens typically mean?
It's going to be a little drier right there.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And then along the bottom here, there's probably good gravel in here, and that's actually probably pretty good walking.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to that's all willow. You'd want to stay away from that. And then this side over here, I just don't love the way it looks. It's got more texture. It's got a little bit more like hair on it. And that's probably pretty tussocky and pretty wet. So that's all a matter of experience, though. And that's difficult to do if you've never been there.
Yep. So let's see. Let's talk about some like general areas of where you might find the best walking.
Yes. Here we go. So let me show you the map. And I didn't realize I've been talking.
It's okay. We're at 48 minutes.
I hope everyone's okay with it. So the best walking, typically like anywhere north of the Continental Divide, is good walking, and then north of the Noatak Ambler Divide here too is good walking, and then although not universally, and then on the south side, anything over about 2,500 feet tends to be good walking. Now, let me nuance that a little bit. So that's just like the general parameters of like where there's good walking, but within that, areas that are recently graveled, so like along large rivers or on alluvial fans, steeper slopes, and then if you're looking at satellite imagery, if you can find finer grained gray bedrock. Let me show you an example. Okay, so this is not great walking. This is like dark metamorphic. It's got a lot of texture to it. It looks pretty coarse. So that's not great walking. But if you go just a little bit further north, and you get like into this lighter gray color, and notice how like smooth it looks, that is typically very good walking. So good luck, everyone.
Okay, let's let's actually let's take a few from the chat. So Corey asks, how do you feel about writing trip reports versus LNT?
I mean, yeah, you gotta be careful. I think trip reports are fine so long as you're not giving it away.
That's what I
So
just
just be vague with the descriptions.
Agreed. Yeah. Suggestions on crossing rivers.
Oh, that's like a whole presentation unto itself. We did some like river fording discussions on an Ask Us Anything. Was that last summer, Katie? Like
That was the High Sierra.
High Sierra, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I would tell you about most of the rivers in the Brooks Range have a gravel bottom, and it's counterintuitive. It's against conventional wisdom, but it's by far and away easier to go down to ford at a 45-degree angle downstream of the current. And because it's a gravel bottom, like more finer gravels, the risk of foot entrapment is like low to zero, and there's just going to be a much easier way to cross the rivers. And expect to cross rivers, like lots of rivers, every day, multiple times a day. Your feet will never be dry.
Yes.
Ever, ever, ever.
Yes. Yes. So which brings us actually to our next topic and a question, recommendation on shoes, boots or trail runners. And then let's talk about also footwear first, but gear selection in general that's unique to Alaska.
So, Katie, what's our recommendation for footwear in Alaska?
Yes, something trail runners, not boots and nothing Gore-Tex because it's just going to get wet and stay wet.
Yeah. Are there
something that's good off trail? So you have a post that's about this, but something that has some stiffness to it because you have to think you're not walking on a like well-trod trail, so there's a lot of foot mobility that's happening, and you're moving your foot in a lot of different directions. So you want to have something that has like a stiff midsole.
Pick number one, La Sportiva Bushido, if you can make it work. This shoe is no longer available. The Salomon X Ultra is a good option. A lot of the La Sportiva shoes, the Raptor, not the what's the other one? The Wildcat. That's not the La Sportiva Mutant is an awesome option. We don't recommend the Ultra Lone Peak unless your feet look like canoe paddles. You're just not going to have the lateral stability in those. The Wildcats kind of get destroyed. Brooks Cascades get destroyed. Yeah.
Pizza Rune has asked for an update on that post.
I don't think it's changed a whole lot. I mean, I've been getting advertisements from La Sportiva saying that they've got a third generation Bushido, so I guess that's going to be the new recommendation. But I think between the Bushido and the Mutant, I think I would start there and see if either of those will work for you.
Great. Other gear, like specific gear considerations for Alaska. So we usually recommend a full-sided shelter.
Yeah.
Because of the rain. An eye mask because it's gonna, if you want to sleep, because it's gonna be light 24/7. What other things? Recommendations as far as like types of backpack?
Some kind of durable backpack, so something at least 200 denier. The backpacks nowadays are pretty good. So any like the hyperlight packs, or ULA or Seek Outside, any of those packs will work.
Mm-hmm. Definitely bring full rain gear and like not flimsy, super ultralight rain gear, like legit three-layer rain gear.
Yeah.
Head nets.
Bring two.
Yes.
They're easy to lose or rip, so bring two.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Wildlife is a big concern for people traveling in the Brooks Range. So people, I think mostly grizzly bears, but also things like wolverines, wolves. What should people be thinking about in terms of wildlife?
Yeah, it's kind of like not the concern. Like it doesn't even make my top 3. So, yeah, there are bears. Definitely pull up some tutorials on how to deal with grizzly bears. The grizzly bears are not used to seeing humans. They don't associate humans with food. If you do get in trouble with a grizzly bear, more than likely it's going to be a sow with cubs. If you start to be stalked by a grizzly bear or black bear, I don't think I've ever seen a black bear in the Brooks Range. that's a predatory issue, and you got to be really careful at that point. Yeah. Definitely carry bear spray. Bear spray is another thing that we run into issues with flying. So you can fly with it on the right air flights and on the bush planes, but they make you like put it in a separate compartment in like a hazmat bag.
There's a good question in here about foot care, which we have feelings about. Any plans for foot care end of day, given that you'll be constantly wet?
Well, I think you could answer that pretty well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would say, yeah, I think the biggest thing is allowing your feet to dry out overnight. So as soon as you can, getting your wet shoes and socks off. We recommend carrying, if you don't want to carry, so we recommend bread bags instead of camp shoes because it's lighter. So take off your wet socks and shoes, put on your bread bags, your dry socks, and then your bread bags. You can put them back into your shoe and they won't get wet, so you can walk around camp. And then I don't personally use the foot balm, but you're a big fan of foot balm and recommend it to clients. So you can put foot balm on your foot overnight to sort of like absorb into the skin so that it then repels, your foot is more repellent to absorbing the water the next day. Anything else to add to that?
Nope, sounds good. The other thing I would just say, like any kind of break, and maybe I was looking at chat messages as you were talking, so you might have mentioned this, but any kind of break, off with shoes and socks. And in a group setting, one of the things you always want to be doing is communicating like what people should be doing at a certain time. So like when we take a break, we'll say, hey, we're going to take a break for 20 minutes. This is a shoes off break. And then kind of give like a warning after 15 minutes and saying like, all right, 5 minutes, we're heading out of here. So just communicate that really well, because what you don't want to do is not tell people that they have the opportunity to take off shoes and socks.
Yep. Tips on how to deal with mosquitoes in Alaska. I think it's zen, like having a zen mind. Yeah, I think just like tuning it out and just like, yeah. I mean, other than the obvious of like bring a head net and you could bring like too.
So there is like the personal defense part. So it's the head net, it's the permethrin treated clothing, it's the full-sided shelter with a bug net inside of it. But it's outside of that, it's just the attitude that like it is what it is. You're not gonna doing this
for 7 days straight.
Yeah. So
I think this is a great one. Thoughts on preparing for medical concerns, first aid, and evacuations. Yeah. I think this speaks to what we started the call with, which is this is very far away. It's very remote. You have to show up a lot more prepared to be a lot more self-sufficient. So I think having like a bit of like a beefed up first aid kit, knowing at least, having some wilderness first aid training, knowing that help is going to be a long ways away if you need it. And so being ready to deal with that.
Yeah. And your decision making also needs to be conservative. This is kind of like the skiing equivalent of a no-fall zone. Like if you get badly hurt out there, it could be a really long time before you are helped.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. The chat's going too fast for me right now.
Okay.
Do you want to speak to a resupply on a long trip?
Yeah. There are very few options. Let me just kind of show my map again.
Please.
So if you were doing some type of Brooks Range traverse, there are two options, and that's it. Well, actually, three options. One is when you hit the Dalton Highway, you can hitchhike. It might take you a little while, but probably the first car will pick you up. You can hitchhike down into Coldfoot. Coldfoot, there's an old trucker stop, and they have a buffet, and it's awesome. And then the second option is that you could resupply in Inukjuvik Pass. That would definitely be an option. And then your third option is that you pay some bush pilot a lot of money to drop off a barrel of food for you on a gravel bar. And it's like the most expensive chocolate you've ever eaten in your life.
Tastes good for a lot of reasons.
It does, yeah.
Okay, let's cover two other topics. So physical preparedness, I think we can speak to that pretty quickly. And then there have been several questions about describing trips, as well as there were some in the chat earlier about like best locations. And we haven't really spoken to other locations,
Yep.
like top locations for backpacking, because there was also one that came in from the forum of recommendations for that minimize technical skills.
Okay, so I'll pitch the physical preparedness piece over to you. So what do we see on these trips that we don't see on other ones?
Well, I think we see twisted ankles and we see blisters more. We just see a lot more. We see a lot more foot trouble. We see those on other trips, but I think we see them even more here because as we've been talking about, all of the tussocks and the muskeg and the footing is just so uneven and it's so exhausting to travel in. So if you can think of walking through like pretty much spongy ground for most of the day, and your shoes being wet, it just like saps energy, and people are more prone to injury. Like all of there's no easy walking essentially. So I think showing up with even higher physical preparedness is more important here than anywhere.
I would say there's no easy walking unless you know how to find good walking.
It's true. Yes, it's true. And it's a welcome break when you find it.
Having guided a few trips with you, I would like credit for being able to find good walking.
You do find good walking, but it's not like you have good walking all day. It's
No,
like
you
you
don't.
savor
No.
it when you have it for like an hour, and then you're like back in the tussocks or back in the spongia, and you're like,
Yeah,
okay.
that's true. That's true. Or like stumbling on the river cobbles. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, and then the other question about sort of like other locations. So yeah, we've talked a lot about the Brooks Range, and that's all good. I think we're kind of done there. So your other areas that get a lot of the attention. So one of them is Denali, and Denali National Park. Let's see, yeah. So the park is purple, and this is a popular area because everyone knows Denali. It's definitely more park-like in its regulations. The whole area is divided up into these wilderness zones, and then the wilderness office sort of says that only so many people can be camping in each wilderness zone, like per night. So it's a lot more complicated. And then just across the street, it's kind of not kidding. This is the Eastern Alaska Range, and this is state land, largely state land, and this is the exact same geology as the Denali National Park, but you don't have any of the regulations really. The issue that you have in both of these places, you have huge rivers because of the glaciers, and let's see. These are giant active, not like that's not great. There we go. That's better. So these are still active glaciers. They have huge crevasses, and like you can cross them further down, but what happens is they melt. They have exceptional amounts of melt in the summer, and it actually, like, unlike our big snow melt, which happens in June, coinciding with the snow melt, here in Alaska, the glaciers melt like later in the summer, like July, sometimes even maybe usually not August, but it coinciding with the hottest summertime temperatures, and these rivers can just become ferocious. So that's the big issue you have here. The other thing you have a lot more like interior brush, a lot more bushwhacking. It has its own challenges. And then so that's the Brooks or the Alaska Range. The other area be worth checking out is Wrangells St. Elias, and this is its own national park down here. This park is huge. I think this is actually the largest national park in North America, in like the United States. Two different mountain ranges, and this again is an area. So this is coastal. So you have bigger glaciers, bigger rivers, thicker brush, sort of like packcraft required in this area.
Okay.
Another area worth one final one, Lake. It's Lake Clark. If anyone else wants to do like some good book reading, it's someone in the chat probably will know this. What's the book written by the guy who like builds a homestead out at Lake Clark? Someone put it in the chat, please. Fantastic read. So this is Lake Clark. This is beautiful terrain, but it's kind of wet. It's beautiful, but has its own difficulties. And finally, the Kenai Peninsula. And this is another coastal area, temperate rainforest. Here's another area where pack rafts are sort of critical. This is like I haven't looked at a map. So I did years ago, Katie, I did a trip like this, and then I crossed all these fords.
Wow.
in my pack raft with like whales breaching nearby.
Sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Dick
Older life.
Kremke.
Thank you. Yep, that's it.
Yep.
Okay, listen, we're
7:05
in. Yeah. So
Yes.
obviously there's some passion for Alaska on this chat.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending. It was great to see so many people here and to see everyone so engaged. So yes, thank you for coming tonight. We're not sure when we're going to do this again.
Yes, we totally do. We're doing another how to plan a backpacking trip in the High Sierra. I don't remember the date.
Do we have a date? Oh, we have one. It's in May. It's in late May. That's right.
There it is.
But right now we're focused on Utah because we're going in 2 weeks.
Yes, we leave for Utah in 2 weeks. Final announcement. I've mentioned this at the beginning, but there are a lot more people here now. So we have 1 openings left out of our 12 trips in Utah. It's on a 7-day technical canyoneering trip. If you're interested, all the trip information is up on the website. And if you do want to do it, get on it quick because we need to get you.
We have 0 openings in Alaska, but you could apply to get on the wait list if you want, or apply next year.
Or you can see us in 2025.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Katie. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.